I'm back! Did you miss me? Well, hello everyone, welcome back to my lovely series today. I'm sorry, but I only have one video for you. I know, but the video that we will be covering today is a bit of a controversial one. It is William Shakespeare. And yes, I'm talking about that 1500s poet and writer, famous for his plays like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and Macbeth. I can say that because I'm not in a theatre. But today we're going to be taking a little bit more of an analytical look at his work. We're mainly going to be discussing whether his intentions behind the work he created should influence audience interpretations of the pieces. But we are going to need to discuss some fundamental theories around this question so we can properly answer it. So let's get into that. Now, let's talk Roland Barthes. He created this idea called structuralism, which obviously created an anti-idea called anti-structuralism. He created this theory as a comeback to Wimsley and Beardsley's theory on formalism. We'll get there, I promise. Wimsatt and Beardsley created a book called The Intentional Fallacy. This discusses how the intentions of an author should not reflect on the piece itself, and the audience should be able to get a different meaning than what was intended, and that still be the correct one, because it was their meaning of the text. This intentional fallacy created a division in the critic space, the intentionalists and the anti-intentionalists. This also birthed the idea of formalism. However, in the modern day, we don't really think like that, and we especially don't do that with Shakespeare. So let's have a little bit more of a brief summary and run through all of those definitions, and we'll get back to it. Oh, I've seen that Steven Spielberg movie, like E.T., right? This should be similar to that then. Shh. What are you talking about? This is an action sci-fi film. This is gonna be like The Last Starfighter, or Life 2.0, or The Matrix, or Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, or Free Guy. Let's not assume what it's gonna be like based off the author, okay? Let's look at the genre. Jeez. Hello, I am an artist, and I've created this beautiful piece of work. And my intentions with it are just to show, ducks in nature, and we need to take care of them. We need to nurture them. That's a duck. I don't think it's that deep. I well and truly don't think it's that deep. It doesn't even look that good. I am an artist, and I have created this beautiful piece of work here, and my intentions with it are, don't care. That is a bird because of its feathers and a bill. That's all. I also forgot to mention in my little introductory paragraph, there is another definition that I have to cover, and personally it's quite a funny one for me, so let's just show that. No, don't cry. You're too sexy. Ah, love you. What the...
In a kind of mental rut, I will either subconsciously or consciously kind of isolate myself from my loved one.
Oh, hey, let's get back into it. A few things that I should point out, first of all, is that obviously I'm not in the 1500s. I'm in the modern 21st century, so I'm having a bit of a different take on what's going on in Shakespeare's time. And I'm a big structuralist. After looking into this topic a bunch, I found that intentions to me don't matter in a piece of work, and I shouldn't have to go watch a million interviews to understand what was trying to be conveyed if I already have my own opinion. Now, to answer the question, in what ways do the universal themes of Shakespeare's plays support or challenge Roland Barthes' conception of the death of the author? My main idea and opinion is that Shakespeare has very limited universal themes to begin with. Everyone has their own history and understanding of his work, so everyone is going to get different ideas of what it means. We can never be unbiased to our own history and privileges, so to assume that everyone is going to get the same understanding of Shakespeare is not properly understanding the differences in the world. Now let's get into my first main question. Does Shakespeare really have universal themes? Well, I've done a bit of digging into The Tempest and Romeo and Juliet, and here's what I've come up with. In The Tempest, there is a big universal, or what should be universal, theme of colonization. Yes, when Prospero goes to that island and enslaves Caliban and Ariel, and when the rest of the gang on the boat show up and try and do the same thing. Colonization. Well, there are some differing opinions about that in the world. In America, for example, yes, I will be picking on them during this essay, they have flags in every classroom and fight for the Constitution of Rights, where they're able to bear arms proudly and limit healthcare access and not have good education. Yes, the land of the free. While in Indigenous Australia, they have a very different view of colonization. There was genocides and the loss of history and culture. So I think that if you took an American person who promoted colonization and an Indigenous person who was against it and put them in front of The Tempest, they'd come out with differing views on it. Oh, okay. People from places who have colonized other places and are proud of it are more likely to have a different view of The Tempest, or one that's a lot more Western. This could be that they don't empathize with Caliban and what he goes through in the play under Prospero's control. For a more Indigenous community, they would have a lot more empathy for him and possibly heartbreak for him when he gets left behind at the end of the play. Groups of people who have been historically enslaved, colonized, and discriminated against would see Prospero as the antagonist of the play and feel differently about how Prospero and Caliban are displayed, compared to someone who was more colonialist. For an example, a colonialist could believe that leaving Prospero behind at the end of the play was an act of mercy, saving him from more enslavement. Meanwhile, a group that has been colonized could feel immense hatred for Prospero and the people on the ship leaving behind Caliban, taking away his connection to his land and forcing him to learn their practices, stripping him of his identity and leaving him to try and fix it. In Romeo and Juliet, there is a main, or what should be universal, theme of arranged marriages. Yes, the one between Juliet and, let's bring back America. So, they don't do arranged marriages. Because they were colonized by Britain, they took their customs, and that didn't include arranged marriages. However, there are still arranged marriages that happen in America, but they are normally of populations who don't really hold American views, like immigrants or people who come from a different culture. Meanwhile, if we get a little bit more east on the map, it is very common practice, sadly, for people to be put into arranged marriages. This could be that it's seen as part of the culture or history of the space. This is also meant to keep the two households who are being wed together to stay harmonious. Even in the modern day, yes, there are still arranged marriages, but they are becoming a little bit more relaxed. However, people are still being forced to marry other people, but they get a little bit more choice now. They just have to be in your ethnic group or class or higher or religion, but you get to choose now. So this could impact the interpretation of the play Romeo and Juliet for audiences, as people who are from a social standard of arranged marriages would see that Juliet is defying her family and being selfish with running her with Romeo. This could impact the audience's interpretation of the play as if you were from a place that didn't have arranged marriages. Juliet running off with Romeo is the ultimate sacrifice. She's going against her family, she's making her own life, and she's truly in love with Romeo. Meaning that when the double suicide happens at the end of the play, it's because of their true love for each other. Meanwhile, if someone was from a social culture where they did have arranged marriages or choosing your partner wisely, the arranged marriage between Juliet and Paris would be seen as a good thing to keep the two families intact and harmonious. Well, it's editing Caitlin here now because my mic conveniently cut out for the next part of it, so I'm just going to read it to you now. Implying that Juliet breaking the agreement between her and Paris's families to get married and running off with her love Romeo was a form of rebellion against her parents. She didn't actually love Romeo. Therefore, when she dies at the end, it's not a confession of love, but it's the guilt eating her alive for what she's done and how she's put her two families of her and Paris probably out of a harmonious cycle. So the only way to get out of it without facing the consequences of her action is to join him. So yeah, there could be universal themes in Shakespeare's play, like love. Everyone has love for something, but when we really get down to what love is, what it feels like, what it's for, everyone is going to have a different take. So when we look at Shakespeare's plays and we talk about the universal themes of them, they're really only universal to a specific group of people. Okay, let's talk about a different aspect of this question. Is Shakespeare's intentions with his work important? In The Tempest, I've done a bit of research as to why he wrote it. However, a lot of answers came up with nothing because Shakespeare never wrote personal stories. He never wrote about his life, so we don't really have a definite answer. And The Tempest is it's not real, right? There's magic, there's spells, there's a forest nymph. It's not real, so we know that he's not writing about a real event. Well, not fully. There was something that did happen. Let me read it for you. The love and marriage of the play taking place between Miranda and Ferdinand was supposedly a commission piece for Elizabeth, daughter of James I, and Frederick IV of Palatine. This was to celebrate their marriage, so he put it in the play. They had a naval fight upon the river of Thames for their wedding? Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, like the crash in The Tempest with the boats and everything, could that be representation of their marriage? And then, the marriage happens and then they rebuild the ships? Maybe, but he wasn't writing it about social commentary or to really have an impact on the viewer. He was writing it because he writes plays. That's what Shakespeare does. So his intentions behind it aren't really impacting already what the play is. So if we take his intentions away from it and just look at the play as best as we can, we're not really going to get that different of an idea with Shakespeare's history because he doesn't input anything to it. I think that without knowing Shakespeare's whole background, the text of The Tempest is inherently quite racist and doesn't really go well with modern audiences. A trying to be as unbiased as I can interpretation of the text would include such lines as a savage and deformed slave, not honoured with the human shape. Prospero, I'm talking about Caliban, by the way, tries to civilize him by teaching him their language and practices. Sounds weird, like not given a human shape. Sounds a little bit like, I don't like how you look because you look different than me. A savage and deformed slave. They call him a slave. Okay, this is in the text of The Tempest. So if we're taking a formalist view of this, yes, The Tempest inherently is racist towards Caliban. That's what happens in it. If we look at Shakespeare's history, yes, this was in the 1500s, but that shouldn't impact our modern interpretation of the text. So, should Shakespeare's interpretation of the text impact our thoughts behind it? Well, look at what Barthes says. To give a text an author is to impose a limit on the text, to furnish it with a final signified, to close the writing. What does this mean? Because sometimes I do get a little bit lost in his writing. So, I believe that he is talking about to put an author on a piece of text is to limit the text to being what the author wants. This is to close it off to further interpretation or understanding, meaning that we're limiting the value that we can get from the text because we can't think of it in modern day terms. We can't look at Caliban and go, he was an aboriginal to the land and they were colonizing him. We'd have to go, okay, this is the 1500s, and I mean, that's what they do then. Weird. So, like Barthes says, Shakespeare's interpretations of the text should not contribute to the message or importance of the text because we can't think about the time and place it was written if we're reading it now. Now let's talk about the Romeo and Juliet side of this. Again, it's not fully understood why Shakespeare wrote this play, but there is a strong theory behind it. There was this guy called Arthur Brooke in 1562. He wrote this poem called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, that sounds a little like Romeo and Juliet, doesn't it? Yeah, because it was a poem that Shakespeare based Romeo and Juliet off of. Okay, I'm not calling him a plagiarist. I'm just saying it was heavily based off of that, and then he made it a tragedy and then sold it as a play and went, I'm a genius. Arthur Brooks didn't even come up with that idea himself. It was actually from a different guy called, I'm so sorry. Matteo Bandello in 1554, who released a bunch of different stories just in a book, like 214 tales in a book, that then Arthur Brooke took his inspiration off of to write that, which then Shakespeare took inspiration off that to write Romeo and Juliet. So, no, he didn't really come up with Romeo and Juliet, and that's really the main theory behind it, that Shakespeare was a playwright, so he found good stories and he made them plays. What's his intention behind this? To make a play. So, is that important? Not really. Okay, let's think about Romeo and Juliet without all of that. Just pretend we didn't hear all of that and we're going to look at it without it. Okay. The age gap looks really bad. Just like the 13-year-old Juliet with like the 30s to 40-year-old Romeo doesn't look too great. So the age gap, the arranged marriages, the misogyny just doesn't sit well with modern audiences. The age gap, arranged marriage, misogynistic views of the play just don't sit well with modern audiences when we run it normally. Yes, they do love the Romeo, we've got the Romeo. But like, can we not make her 13? I feel like we can move past that. As actors, as writers, as audiences, let's not promote that. Critics do claim that these factors were just products of the time. Be fundamentalist for a second and bear with me and just think about, we're reading it now. So what is our meaning of it now? So now, coming back to, should Shakespeare's intentions with his work impact its meaning? Let's look at Barthes again. Writing is the destruction of every voice, of every point of origin. What does that mean? Okay, when we look at this play, we need to imagine the writing is now. Because we can't think about the point of origin, we have to view it as the writing is happening now. It is no point in time that it's fixed to. So the age gap, arranged marriage, sexism should be changed for modern audiences, as that's when we're presenting it. I don't believe that we need to go back in time and sit in the Globe Theatre with Shakespeare's original work and have actors perform it directly how he written it, which, side note, would mean men playing women, to understand what Shakespeare was trying to do. I think that we can modernize the text, change it around, make it better for us, and still get the same meaning out of it. So, when talking about the importance of Shakespeare's intentions, he proves the point of Barthes that's trying to make in his book, The Death of the Author. Barthes also says, this disconnection occurs. The voice loses its origin. The authors enter into his own death. Writing begins. This, to me, basically shows that the value we gather from Shakespeare, or really any form of literature or art, is created in modern history. So to tie the author to their intentions to the work is not allowing writing to continue to happen, not allowing more people to get their own interpretation of the work, truly limiting the universal themes Shakespeare's meant to have. As you know, universal themes are meant to transcend time and space. So to tie Shakespeare and the 1500s to Romeo and Juliet or The Tempest is to bring it back in time and limit those universal themes. Okay, we've gotten to my favorite point. Why have people modernized Shakespeare? Because I mean, like, if I've been saying Shakespeare doesn't have universal themes, why do we keep bringing it back up? Well, there's a couple of reasons, okay? Bear with me for this one. People like making Shakespeare more accessible because have you tried reading Shakespeare? I have. It's not fun for me. He was writing at a different time with different words and different language, it feels like. Also because Shakespeare is quite popular. I'm saying he doesn't have universal themes. I'm not saying he's a bad playwright. He writes good plays. I just don't think every single person can relate to them. Let's talk about some examples of modernizing Shakespeare. Okay, The Return to the Forbidden Planet. A musical set in the 1990s about the Tempest, but what if we put it on a spaceship and didn't make it so racist? Honestly, I'm in love with it. The whole musical takes place on the spaceship, so they don't have to change the set around. But also there was one very interesting thing I found while watching it. There's no Caliban. There is a character Cookie who represents Caliban's love for Miranda without being able to have her. But they took Caliban out of the script. There's a Prospero, an Ariel, Miranda, the bosun, and Ferdinand played by the same guy because, of course, they would. But Caliban is nowhere to be seen. And this is what every production of The Tempest has to encounter. How will they face the racism in the text? And in this musical, they just took him out. This exclusion of Caliban does change the main themes of the musical, and more modern formalists or structuralists or both will say, this is for the better. I believe we're able to feel more empathy for Prospero and Miranda without their personalities being tainted by being colonialists or people who have enslaved a person. This also makes the love triangle between Cookie, the Caliban but only love for Miranda stand-in, the bosun / Ferdinand guy, and Miranda a lot more interesting, because in theory she could get with any one of them. However, if you've seen The Tempest before, you know it's going to be the bosun. Anyways, that's why this musical is so interesting. They have re-transformed Shakespeare and brought it into a more modern time. Yes, I'm saying modern was like 40 years ago, but it was more modern. They had brought it back, and very successfully. I mean, yes, is it all set in space? So instead of the boat crash because of magic, there's a giant space monster that attacks them? Yes. Do they do that to Monster Mash? Yes. And personally, it's just a much better experience. I mean, they quote Shakespeare in it. And this musical is making Shakespeare more accessible to more people, because yes, Shakespeare is a good writer, and he wrote at a time where people spoke differently. So being able to interpret his work and bring it to people now in the language that they use allows them to access Shakespeare. And that's a very fundamental piece of history for especially theatre. I'm just going to take a little bit moment to talk about my favourite things about this musical. One is the songs. Also has how they use the audience in it to like recalibrate the ship and stuff when they're fixing it. I love audience interaction. So it's just really enjoyable to watch. I have it linked in all my references and I highly recommend it. The audio quality is actually quite good as well as the video. So go watch that. Honestly, it's beautiful. Okay, we've finally gotten to my favorite section and we're talking about and Juliet. I know I've gotten a bit off track with what the main question is, but we're gonna wrap around, okay? We're gonna wrap around, okay? Bear with me. And Juliet, the musical, based off Romeo and Juliet, where the main point of this musical is what if Juliet lived beyond Romeo's suicide? The main plot of this story follows Anne, Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, not her, through changing Shakespeare's story because she feels like, Shakespeare, I've done so much for you. I've had your kids, we've been together for so long and you're a famous playwright now. I'd love it if you, wrote a play about our love. Yeah, so in this one, they die at the end. In this production, there is also a playful use of Shakespeare. I mean, yes, they are changing a Shakespeare play, but also Shakespeare is in the play and in that play. There's a play into play. The musical is Romeo and Juliet, and there is Shakespeare in that. But then there is also the musical about Juliet's life within that, which Shakespeare is also in as an ensemble character, mostly in the second act. Anne Hathaway follows Juliet through her life trying to discover who she is. She makes a bunch of friends, her and the nurse and May, and they all go off to Paris together. Anne Hathaway throws herself into Juliet's life as April, one of her friends who is her age. The main things that this musical does that makes Romeo and Juliet and Juliet more entertaining is it's a couple of things. Juliet's not 13. She also has friends her own age. She doesn't die at the end of Romeo and Juliet. that's great. She actually has a support system. There is also a lot of allyship between queer characters. Now, we talked about May a little bit before, but May is represented in this musical to be non-binary. They do this beautiful song called I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman, representing how they want to be with Francois, however they can't because Francois is supposedly straight and would only be with Juliet. This is really interesting to see because theatre has always been a place for queer and diverse communities, so representing this on stage is very monumental and important. Now, if the real Shakespeare was sitting in the audience somewhere, he probably wouldn't be having the best time seeing all of this, first of all, bright colours. He's from the 1500s. And second of all of this allyship and diversity and inclusivity. It's beautiful to see. He would hate it. He built Juliet as an innocent, sweet little girl who just gets caught into this love and her family doesn't accept her and she has to run away and double suicide. Meanwhile, in Anne Juliet, she is powerful and empowers others around her. She decides her own life and makes her own choices. Shakespeare would hate that. And that is where we swing back around to the death of the author. Okay? Barthes is all about how the author dies, the text is written. Okay? Shakespeare's already dead, physically and metaphorically, right? All of his plays have already been written, and he's in the ground. So, to really just commit to this idea of Barthes, Shakespeare is dead. So why should we care about his intentions or what he wanted with his work? It's ours now. My duck drawing that I made, when I'm gone, people can do whatever they want with that because I'm gone. Like Barthes claims, every text is eternally written here and now. Using this ideology, modernizing text is not changing it, as it's still here in this moment. Maybe it looks a little bit different and Juliet's more of a feminist, but we still get the same ideas and themes represented in the musical as in the play. Okay, we're rounding it off with a nice conclusion, okay? People have modernized and continue to express Shakespeare, his writing, of course, because of his brand. I know that's a bit of a sinister take, but look at it this way. Shakespeare is able to be unbound by language, like Barthes claims. His hand is too slow for his thought or passion, and that, consequently, making a law necessary, he must empathize this delay and indefinitely polish his form, meaning most people need to rewrite and re-edit and re-script their work to make it just a little bit closer to the vision that they have in their minds. Shakespeare was able to do this pretty closely without having to go back 100 years later and redefine what his work was about. He was able to express emotions and feelings and ideas that are so deep and complicated through his plays without needing to go to an interview and talk about, oh no, I actually meant for it to be emotional. So this is why people keep coming back to Shakespeare. His plays are well written, they're good stories. Are they good stories for everyone? No, they're not good stories for everyone. Everyone has their own opinions on them. Barthes also claims it's words only explainable through other words, and so on indefinitely. When we modernize Shakespeare, we are restating his words with more words, and that's just going to continue on forever. And yeah, it is. People rewrite themselves and other people all the time. I mean, Shakespeare did it to Arthur Brooke and to the guy before him. So yes, we're going to keep rewriting Shakespeare. Is that because he is universally appreciated or creates universal themes in his plays? No. In my opinion, no. Not everyone can sit down in front of a Shakespeare play and get the same message he was trying to create. So it isn't really universal. But will everyone get a message from his plays? Hopefully, if we make them accessible enough. Some could also say we modernize Shakespeare's work because it is so timeless that we can recreate it indefinitely. But in reality, we changed a lot of what Shakespeare's done. I mean, just an example I've given of Return to the Forbidden Planet and Juliet, we change his words a lot, but we still keep the meaning of the plays there. We still are able to keep the core ideas of the play because they're embedded in the text. If we were able to retell Shakespeare's plays in exactly how he wanted us to, in his exact words, we would be extremely offensive to modern audiences. I mean, having an Indigenous man play Caliban in Australia would be pretty offensive because we come at Shakespeare with a modern interpretation, knowing our history and understanding of these words that could have changed over time. So in a bit of a summary, no, we don't really retell Shakespeare because of his universal and universally loved themes. We retell Shakespeare because it's interesting. He is able to write so passionately, and because, well, people will buy tickets to anything saying based on a Shakespeare play. So yes, the universal themes of Shakespeare supports Roland Barthes' idea that the author is different from the text, and when the text is written, the author is as good as dead.